Greetings and welcome to the pod. My name is Mark West, and this week we're talking about connecting with blue spaces.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Rebecca Olive is an ocean swimmer whose academic research explores the role of sport and leisure in human and environmental health. In particular, her work explores the practices and cultures of ocean swimming and surfing to understand how human and environmental well-being interact, as well as our relationships to all things blue space, such as sharks, animals, plastics, pollution, and health. Her Moving Oceans website examines how participation in ocean sports shapes our behaviours towards taking care of the oceans. She has also published some fantastic reads, and you can see them on the website. I started in the usual way by asking her if she's always been an ocean swimmer.
Are you interested?
So I have always been a swimmer, but quite a recreational swimmer. So I grew up on the beach, like 200 meters from the beach. So I've always been very comfortable in especially oceans. But like I learned to swim so young that I can't really remember not being able to swim. And I grew up in Byron Bay, and I learned to swim in the Byron Bay pool. And our swim teacher was Dennis, and he taught all the local kids to swim. So yeah, I remember, I've been swimming in that pool my whole life. But I was never a squad swimmer, really. So I'm a very competent, confident, capable swimmer, but I'm not fast. And so when I'm in a pool swimming laps and people who are squad swimmers their whole lives swim next to me, it just blows my mind what they can access in the water, that despite my comfort and competency in the water, I cannot move through water the way that good swimmers can.
And what sort of got you into your research area, studying sport and culture and sport in nature, that sort of thing?
So I study how the role of sport in shaping our relationships to ecologies. And I focus on oceans because when we do sport in oceans, and I look at ocean swimming and surfing as well, actually, but mainly swimming, we're completely immersed. And if you swim in oceans, you'll know that feeling of vulnerability that comes with that, of being, literally out of our depth, out of our element, and amongst a bunch of animals and waves and conditions. And so my background was in gender politics of surfing. And I don't know, I guess it was just like surfing a lot and thinking about politics and culture in the water led me to think about the politics of place as well. And in in surfing, surfers often talk about themselves as, the best people placed to care for oceans. And I wanted to really understand if that was the case. And as I went along, I realized that swimmers actually, are also in these same intimate relationships with oceans, and that was a growing kind of activity. It's always been popular, but it's grown a lot. This was pre-COVID, but then during the pandemic, obviously, it really boomed. And so yeah, I wanted to understand how swimmers are making sense of that too. Yeah.
Okay, so the idea that the ocean is more than just the background to what you're doing, but is kind of part of what you're doing.
That's exactly right. And the research previously had often talked about nature as a landscape for sport. And, in that, like in those fields of lifestyle and action and nature sports, we're also looking at skiing and hiking and rock climbing and mountain biking, as well as the ocean-based sports. And often the research focused on the highest level, what we call core participants, like the people who are best at it, most elite, most hardcore. And for them, the focus is a lot on competition and performance and achievement. And in that framing, the landscape and the health and of the landscape can fall away as a concern for, we'll call them athletes because that's what they are. But in more recreational versions of the sport, which were kind of less studied in a way, although that's changed a lot, the relationships were a bit different because people were often doing these sports in the place where they lived. And so they had quite deep relationships to these places that developed over time. I mean, I live in a city now, so I have to travel to get to the water, and that's been the case for me for a really long time. So I've learned that for city-based people, they still have these deeply caring relationships to coast. It's just they build a little bit differently. But yeah, it was challenging that idea that for swimmers, we'll say in this case, or hikers and mountain bikers and climbers, that yeah, the ocean or the forest or the mountain means more than just a place to perform against or to be challenged by. And we even see that in a change, like in surfing, for example. In high performance surfing, you hear people saying, I slashed that wave, I tore it up, I ripped. And, in recreational surfing and even in professional surfing, it's changing a little bit, that language, because that's quite an aggressive way of thinking about, surfing a wave. And now people talk a lot more about flow and glide and connection with. So yeah, exactly right. It's really about thinking about place as more than just a background to our pleasure and leisure.
That's so interesting because in swimming, I guess these factors are in other sports as well, but in the ocean, you've got all the animals and things that can eat you, and bugs that can get in your ears, and pollution
Yeah.
that's bad for you. How do you think it? How do you think that people who participate in these sports relate to these kinds of ideas?
Well, that's exactly what I'm researching. So it's different for everyone. It's a real mix. Some people still swim in the ocean and do talk about it as a bit of a background. And I was talking to a guy once, and he was swimming with a squad. They're really, really good swimmers. And he said that there'd been this dolphin jumping around them in their little group swimming. And when he got in and talked about it, the other guys hadn't noticed this dolphin jumping around them. So, whereas I often swim with groups of women, and their whole swim is defined less by the physicality of the swim and more by what they see along the way. So they'll often stop if they see a stingray or a turtle or, a big school of fish, and they'll call out and go, oh, over here, look, look, look. And often the animals swim away, of course, but they're really, really, that's part of their big motivation for the swim. And swimmers will talk about, because you ask them why the ocean and not a pool, and it's be the same with a river, right? A river or a lake. Why this and not a pool? And they talk about a pool as being dead, and they like the liveliness, and they like that multi-species kind of encounters that they're having when they swim. That's actually part of the joy of it for them. Some people find that so intimidating that actually a pool is a place of really great safety. So swimming in the ocean or a river or a lake is too much, and they can't really get over what the implications and the possibilities of that are, because certainly for me, for the places I swim in Australia, encounters with large sharks that are known for having killed people are a possibility. Dying by shark bite is a low possibility. It's very low possibility, but it is a possibility. And so it is something you have to grapple with in terms of when you swim out in the water. And sometimes I'm sure you've had these experiences, it just gets in your head and you can't shake that fear. And in those moments, I just go in because it's just gotten in my head, and it's taken over the swim, the fear. But other times you're able to embrace it as part of the choice to swim out into the ocean. And that's part of what the exciting thing is about being in these places. Because most of the time, for me, in the places I swim, the encounters are with fish and birds and, maybe cuttlefish at different seasons, certainly lots of little stingrays. Yeah, so lots of animals that aren't threatening to us and that you'll see and come across, but that they're not a threat to us, and we're not actually a threat to them either.
Do you think that you mentioned some of the language is changing in surfing? Do you think it's translating to more advocacy to swimmers and surfers get out there placarding "Save Our Oceans" sort of thing? Does that help?
Oh, this is such a good question, and this is the one I'm really grappling with, and had so many conversations about this very thing this week. I think there's long been advocacy in groups like surfing and swimming and ocean swimming. So groups like Surfrider is an international surfing group that's been established for a really long time. Surfers Against Sewage is really famous in Britain. And of course, they're saying surfers because that's where it started, but actually swimmers are a really big part of Surfers Against Sewage now. In Australia, Surfers for Climate has developed. There's a group called Divers for Climate now. In the UK, there's also a group called Right to Roam, which is using access to river swimming and wild swimming. I'm using the inverted commas there. To wild swimming in rivers and lakes as a way to drive public access to space, to what is often privatized space amongst wealthy landowners. So I think there is a lot of activism growing. I think in Australia, it's less amongst swimmers. It is a bit more amongst the surfers because surfers are very good at visual kind of protest. And we saw it. There was a big movement here called Fight for the Bight that was against oil and gas drilling in the Great Australian Bight on the south coast. And so there was a lot of activism around that. Having said that, I would also argue, and all the research shows, that people tend not to actually activate outside in protecting their place. So when we live in a place and we have these really intimate relationships to a place, we come to care for it deeply, and we want to retain our access and our the cleanliness of that place. We get so much from spending time on the coast or in water. All of us do, and anyone who swims knows that feeling. And it's the same with a pool. Like, I would argue the health and well-being benefits that I got from swimming in a pool regularly when I'm living in the inner city, they're not dissimilar to swimming they're very similar. I love pool swimming, big fan. But we often forget to also join those fights when it's also protecting bigger picture things as well. And sometimes we also argue for things to stop things that would be of benefit to the wider community for our benefit too.
Yep, yep.
So it's a complicated question. I do think that swimmers should be more politically active around protecting water places. I don't think we are active enough. Some swimming groups are, but it's definitely case by case, and it's not a collective kind of thing yet. The way that surfing has mobilized, organizations and groups across coastlines, across beaches, across countries, that definitely hasn't happened amongst swimming groups, no.
Yeah, we need a point break for ocean swimmers or something to, So I'm interested. So how did you go from sort of feminist politics into what's the feminist angle on this work?
Yeah, well, it's feminism that brought me to this. So my work always starts because I'm interested in inequitable operation of power, and my starting point for that is gender politics. But it's never the end place, because that's just one aspect of people's lives. And so when you start thinking with feminist work, what you're actually interested in is patriarchy. And that word's very familiar to everyone now. And patriarchy is something that affects us all. It affects men, women, non-binary people. It affects everyone. It affects us unequally, but it affects us all. Men are very affected by patriarchy, and too. And so patriarchy has a lot of effects, not just beyond just gender. It frames our lives in all sorts of ways. So I was reading, a lot of feminists have shown how patriarchy has also emphasized the ways that we distance ourselves from nature. So we think of humans and nature as separate in Western thinking, right? In European traditions of thought, other cultures think very differently. So my thinking is very focused on understanding Western traditions of thought, and why this idea that humans are separate from nature is so enduring. And so a lot of feminist scholarship look back into the past, back to like the Greek philosophers, to show that this had actually been part of patriarchy, was to put women in nature and men as civilized. This is very simplified terms. And so women were always secondary, nature is always secondary. It was always something to be overcome. And so there's this that's what feminists would argue is this enduring patriarchal narrative of the idea of men's mastery over nature, which you can see doesn't actually benefit anyone except people who want to, be disconnected somehow. So this narrative has gone all through European thought and Western thought to today. And so that's where feminism becomes really powerful in thinking about environmental politics. So it's one way of getting into it and critiquing the human nature binary. We call it the idea that humans are separated from nature. And for me, the eco-feminist work that I use now, so the woman who wrote a book called Feminism and the Mastery of Nature is called Val Plumwood. And Val Plumwood's been really instrumental in my thinking about how swimming can challenge that in our lives. Because abstract, we can go, no, humans are part of nature, right? We can say that and we understand that. But here we both are sitting in rooms built to keep nature out. So they're sanitized, we spray for pests, like insects, I should say, not pests. We spray for insects and we keep it all at bay. But when I go swimming in the ocean, I cannot keep it at bay. And so Val Plumwood had an experience where she was attacked by a crocodile. She was by herself and she was attacked by a crocodile. She was death rolled multiple times and she survived. She got away because they were both exhausted, and she climbed up a little hill and got away. And she said, but in that moment, that experience shattered the illusion that humans are not part of ecologies. And I thought one day I was swimming across the bay and I suddenly felt so far from shore and so vulnerable. And I don't know why it was so overwhelming for me in that moment, but I thought of Val Plumwood's line and I realized, this is that
This is it.
moment where
Yeah.
yeah. And it was really powerful for me. So yeah, thinking about how we fit into ecologies has yeah, really come from feminism for me and my train of thought. But yeah, it's a good question actually, because it might not seem obvious
Yeah, it's
from
kind
the
of
outside.
no, I understand where you're coming from. I was, this is a little different, but I was just thinking, I live on the Cooks River in Sydney, which is the most polluted river in Australia or something. And the mastery over nature, like it doesn't flow. When the Europeans got here, they completely channelized it and turned it into something different. Now we're trying to return it to nature. But yeah, I don't think you'd ever swim in the Cooks River.
Not yet, not yet.
Not
But there
yet.
is a movement to, the swimmable cities movement is really big across, certainly I've been looking at it in Australia and it's in like Paris, the Seine is now swimmable. Um, you know, yeah, so there is a movement that we should be able to use these creeks and rivers more and to really recognize what we've done, through, in our case, colonization. Yeah, to these rivers and what we've taken from, not only in our case Indigenous Australians, but also from ourselves, from people being able to access creeks and rivers.
I love your website, and your podcast is way better than this one. Can you
No,
tell us
it's
about?
not.
Oh, it's exactly what I was kind of aiming for, but yours is much more scholarly. Um, can you tell me about the Moving Oceans website and Saltwater podcast?
Yeah, so Moving Oceans is what I named it's the nice name for a project which is called something much more boring officially for the university. And it's that idea of, yeah, the role of physical activity and sport in activating us to think about our relationships to coasts and oceans and to take care of them. And so I've focused on coast and oceans, but it all translates to rivers and lakes and canals and things as well. Yeah, so the website's really like an aggregate area of the project. So you can see photos and have blog posts. This podcast, you're very kind. That's a very generous comment that you made has stalled because I've recently moved, or I moved a year ago, and the producer and I, Hannah, need to pick it back up, and we've got to finish it. But yeah, that was really me wanting to share the kinds of conversations that I was having in my research, and to really promote the scholarship, because I know that it's quite hard. A lot of our work's behind a paywall, or when we write journal articles, it's very difficult to read because it's a particular kind of genre of writing. But the ideas aren't actually usually that like
No, right.
people can understand the ideas once you translate them outside of those publications. So it was trying to get a chance to broadcast some of those ideas a lot more, while also being able to challenge my thinking
Yeah, yeah.
through those conversations too. So yeah, Saltwater Library, got to put out the rest of it. This is a good impetus to get those interviews out. Yeah, I'm glad you found it helpful.
Yeah, no, I really liked it. And so, what's next in your world? You're off to Ireland. Are you going to swim?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm off to the UK and Ireland for some research. I've done quite a bit of research over there, and there's a lot more swimming research of the kind I'm doing happening in the UK than there is in Australia at the moment, weirdly. Yeah, so there's a little ocean sort of conference or symposium happening in Ireland. I'm going to that, and I'm going. My friend, she invited me to swim and do the 10K the dart swim. It's
Wow,
10K
awesome.
down a river, but that's a bit much for me. So I forgot to buy a ticket and now it's sold out. Oops.
Well, you meet her at the finish line.
But I'm going with her while she does that swim, and I'll be her support driver. And what else? I'm going up. I'm hoping to get to Lake Windermere, where a colleague of mine is doing a project called Swimdermere, which is lovely. Yeah, so it'll be really fun to go over there. And now I've just moved to Melbourne, or a year ago, and I'm at RMIT University, where they have a much more urban focus of the kinds of research that happens. So my focus on my work is quite looking a lot more at swimming in cities, I think, which is, very different to thinking about people who live on, remote coasts. But there's lots of swimming in cities. Like Sydney obviously has loads of ocean swimming. There's definitely swimming in Melbourne. There's the Yarra Yabbies, who dunk in the Yarra year round. And I'm sure there's other groups I haven't met yet. And there's lots of great pools and things. I was living in Brisbane, where we also don't swim in the river in Brisbane because it's not safe. It has bull sharks in it too, which I think is a deterrent. But there's lots of pools, and obviously Queensland has a big swimming culture once you get out on the coast as well. Yeah. So thinking about and Europe's recently, like in Sweden, in Denmark, in France, in Germany, they have a really big outdoor swimming culture that is very seasonal. It's based around summer because it's warm. People swim through the year. Cold water swimming, I've heard you talk with others about, is very popular, but it's not for everyone. So summer's really the popular time when they've got swimming in harbours and rivers and lakes around the cities. So it's a really interesting kind of practice.
Beautiful area of work. I think this is fascinating.
I feel very lucky.
Yeah,
I feel very, and the thing is, my methods are to go swimming with people.
Yes.
And to talk to them about, interview them about swimming. But so I'm extra lucky because I get to experience these places and the ecologies that they're swimming into. And it's a wonderful project because people have been so generous to me, and they're so excited to share their swimming places with me. It's a very generous culture. Swimmers are very generous. So I feel lucky to do the work and lucky to be meeting these communities.
Yeah, I guess you're talking to people that really enjoy what they do and are passionate about their areas, which is not true of every area of study. It's quite rare, I guess.
No. Well, even studying surfing, like surfers can be quite secretive about their places,
Right.
because
Yeah.
they don't want more people. Whereas swimmers are still generous.
Lajo. Eating so spot pick a leaf. Shot it in the sea, I be rolling off the
I loved your articles in the conversation, and so I wanted to ask about them, about entering another animal's home and how you can feel safe in that environment. Do you have any tips for people that want to dip into the ocean but have that fear?
Yeah, so we've talked already a bit about how it can be threatening to us, to encounter animals, but actually what can happen is also there can be threat to the animals by us being in the water. If we stay on the sharks, even if someone gets bitten or attacked by a shark, then that shark might be hunted, and we also know in Australia they've put a lot of shark nets to give a sense of safety on beaches, which have resulted in the deaths of whales, stingrays, turtles, all sorts of species of sharks and fish and birds, dolphins. So to make ourselves feel safe can have a really big impact on animals in return. The other thing that we don't talk about much about swimming is because it's a low impact sport in so many ways, right? But at the same time, when we swim, we're still leaving behind microplastics from our swimmers. We're still, shedding sunscreen and moisturizers from our skin, or we're peeing out antibiotics or analgesics and things like this as we swim. So we are leaving things behind. We might, if we go to a remote area, we might trample fragile ecosystems. So we do need to keep that in mind. It shouldn't be, a huge barrier all the time, but it is part of what we need to think about. Because I think there's a sense that we should just have access to all rivers and water and oceans and so on. And I agree with that. But with that, we should take responsibility with the kinds of effects that have. So when it comes to the animals in particular, I think a lot of it's about informing yourself of who might you encounter in the water here? What kind of animals live here? what might you come across, and just having a sense of that before you swim. So that it's always surprising when you see something you weren't, when you come across an animal anyway, even if you thought you might see them. But yeah, it just helps us make better decisions because us swimming has impacts on the animals in return. Yeah.
Have you had any amazing animal encounters in your swims in the bay?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite's just the little common stingray that swims in my hometown, and it's this tiny little sand-colored stingray, and it sits on the bottom, and it sort of flies across the bottom of the seabed, but it has these tiny pale blue spots in its back which feel like portals to the sky or something when
Yeah,
I
yeah,
look at
yeah.
it. So that's my favorite. I have always missed seeing I've never been there for the leopard shark season yet, so I've missed the leopard sharks. Some of the swimmers hear whale song when they're swimming. I haven't had that.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it's amazing. I had a swim in Sydney in Cabbage Tree Bay um, with the Bold and the Beautiful crew, and my first swim there, I saw a dusky whaler shark swimming. I swam at Lady Elliot Island up in Queensland. It's amazing. Still loads of animals there. Surfing, I've surfed with dolphins, and there's been whales in the water, and huge manta rays and things. And so, they really stand out in my memory. One day I was just down at Broken Head, another beach where I grew up, and I was with a friend. We were just in the water on a Tuesday after work, and we must have had a bunch of fish around us, which usually I avoid fish balls, but they were just little fish. And these birds were diving all around us to get the fish, and it was incredible. It was a really memorable experience for both of us. We were just looking at each other like, oh my God, wow. You know, yeah. So I think it's like I prefer swimming in places where there's rocks because often the rocks, they're places that seaweed and lichens and fish, and then all the other animals tend to come around. So I don't particularly like swimming across sandy bottoms because I always feel like you see fewer animals. I did go actually, I was at the beach a few months ago and I forgot to take my goggles. I don't know why. My eyes are pretty sensitive to the salt, but I was like paddling above in water and near a rock, and I was like, oh, there's something big under me. And I had a camera, so I kind of took a photo and when I got back in, I saw it was the tail of some big either shark or ray. I don't know what it had been beneath me, and it was like
Wow.
really big. So yeah.
Maybe it was good you didn't see it.
No, yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have been anything dangerous, but yeah, it was. And another day, actually, I was just coming out of the water and I was in like chest deep water, and a big eagle ray just kept going. It was doing loops around me, and that was pretty nice.
That's
That was,
amazing. It's
yeah.
cool that these animals are still there in urban environments as well, which is I guess they've cleaned up a lot of these areas.
Yeah, well, I mean, here in Melbourne, there's the weedy sea dragons live in the
Yes,
bay,
yeah.
and the bay's super biodiverse. I haven't learned about them yet, but there's a crab species that's, prolific here. There's seals in the bay, there's dolphins in the bay, there's loads of fish and birds, and yeah, so the swimmers have all kinds. There's penguins
Yep, yep.
as well. So the swimmers have all kinds of experiences out there too.
Oh, that's
Yeah, it's
amazing.
incredible.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the main thing I would sort of want to get across is that when we talk, like, people should just get in the water, I mean, no, I don't want to say that actually. What would I want to say? I would want to say that swimming is a wonderful experience. It's so sensual having the water on your skin, being immersed is so beautiful. But I recognize that it's very frightening for a lot of people. Water is very frightening because drowning it's another thing that can happen to us in water. It's very intimidating. But to have these kinds of encounters and experiences, and to experience the joys that I experience from swimming, and I swim about 1.5 kilometers with these ocean swimming groups, that you don't need to swim a distance. You can just, a lot of people call it teabagging or
Yep,
plunging.
yep.
You can have these experiences
Just be
as
there.
well without being out of your depth. So it is, I wouldn't want people to feel like you have to be swimming offshore to have these experiences, to feel these things, that actually you can be quite near shore and have these joyful, interesting encounters as well.
Yeah.
Without feeling like you have to be in waves, without feeling like you have to be out of your depth. Oh, you've done the Alcatraz swim, have you?
Oh, yeah. Just, yeah, a few months ago
Talk
we
about
went.
vulnerability.
Yeah, and cold. I think
Yeah.
well, it's not the beauty of it. The part of it is you can't really see more than a meter in front of your face. I don't think it's not pollution or anything. I just think it's just really silty, and so you just can't see very much. So there was no seeing a shark if there were any there. But
No, it's quite deep too, isn't it?
it's
And
very
there's
deep.
fast moving water. Like you have to, there's a lot of planning to do that swim, right? You have to really, you can't just go out and do it at any time. You really have to plan. I mean, that's like, that's not dissimilar to that point about animals, is it? You know, where you can't just jump in the water and go everywhere. You need to really think at different places and be careful and understand something about them. And that's really part of that relationship of going, oh, I would like to do this thing, but it's, you might turn up and it's not available to you because of, you know, tides or weather. But that's part of what's really fun about it as
Oh, I think
well.
so. Yeah. Well, I mean, there was always the chance that this one might get called off, but I think it goes quite often. But you hear those stories from like English Channel swimmers and people like that who, that's a different league. I'm nowhere there. I'm much lower than that. But
Oh, I
yeah.
met a channel swimmer recently, and they were saying how, like, they'd done the swim, and because of tides and things, it ended up swimming way further than the distance, but they had to get out of the water a kilometer before the shore.
No. I
It would just be, I can't, that would just be, that would take like quite a bit of processing and recovery to
think
really
so.
work through. But it would help that it's a pretty common outcome, I
Yeah, I think
think.
so. Yeah.
Well,
Um,
hey, I've got another conversation article coming up. Let me see if it's been published. I
oh,
can
yeah.
give it to you. It's on river swimming. It's
Oh,
not out yet, but I'll email it to you. It's about the Seine and river swimming in Olympic history,
oh,
because they
wow.
were swimming in the Seine in the 1900 Paris Olympics, and it included this race where it was based. It was a race dedicated. It was a one-off. It's never happened again, or before. And it was dedicated to the goddess of the river. I forget her name, Sakana or something, and it was a swimming obstacle race.
How good's that in the Olympics?
Yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah.
I know. And so yeah, this article is like a sport history of swimming in the Seine. And then it thinks about swimming in cities, and it thinks about that relational stuff as well. Yeah. So that should be coming out today sometime.
Ah,
I'll,
well,
I'll email it to you.
yeah, do. That'll be well out by the time I edit this up together. So I'll
Yeah,
definitely link to
cool.
it. That'd be fascinating to read. Yeah, the swimming in rivers. Yeah, it's not as big in Australia, is it? But I guess we've got such an urbanized coastal environment that the beaches are accessible for many people. But I mean, there are people that
Yeah,
swim
the
inland.
rivers. Yeah, because it's big in the UK, but I think here it's like, yeah, I don't know why. I mean, maybe in regional areas, like people, we used to swim. Like when I went up to the, I was on the coast, and you drive 15 minutes and you're in the country. But all the country kids up in Bangalore and Uribar, they'd be swimming in the creeks and the rivers on their properties, or the dams as well. Um, yeah, so I think in the UK and Europe in particular, it's kind of promoted as wild swimming. That's why I'm doing these things. But here it's just a part of recreational life because it's hot. And so people just play and plunge in water in different ways. Um, and maybe we've just taken it for granted a lot more, and it's not talked about. Like the ocean swimming at the moment's the really glamorous one. But I think it's also that it's a lot of the sport swimmers. So people have gone from pools to ocean swimming in a way. So they're really athletic. They're often very good looking and fit. So they're very Instagrammable is part of it. And I think and oceans are also really associated because that we imagine them as clean in Australia. So they're clean, they're blue, they're sparkly, there's they're
Yeah, yeah.
glamorous, they're romantic, they make you feel so capable, they're full of imagination. And I think that's why for us, and we see ourselves as a coastal nation. But yeah, the river swimming stuff is certainly growing because for some people, the waves are a really big barrier, as is the vastness of oceans, which is so overwhelming. And even sometimes when I'm swimming, I have to close my eyes when I breathe on the ocean side because I just can't look into the blue void anymore. It's too much. Yeah. So yeah, I think river swimming we'll see growing a lot. Yeah.
I know that
Yeah.
feeling because I just breathe to the right. So if I happen to be swimming in that direction, that's all I'm looking at.
Well, Sydney's got a big I went to you might want to look up Urban Plunge. And so yeah, Sydney Water's putting in heaps of swimming spots. I've got to come down because I've got field sites like in Manly and Bondi. So I swim with the pufferfish, who are the Icebergs Ocean Swimming Group,
Ah,
the
yeah,
official
yeah.
one. And that's actually my favorite swim. It's full on because they go off that rock shelf under the pool
Oh,
and
wow.
it's
Yeah.
intense. Yeah, and it's there's a lot of gatekeeping to that swim, which I actually really respect. But I want to come down because I want to go to that spot at Barangaroo and I want to check out some of the spots along the
Yes,
Parramatta River. It's pretty exciting that that's happening. I think it's really cool.
I think so. I haven't tried the Barangaroo. I've got some friends that have tried it, but I haven't been there myself yet.
Yeah, it looks great. So it's so cool because it's also like in a time when we're increasingly risk averse. I think it's
Hmm.
pretty cool, to just get people to go swimming. It's like when I went to Lady Elliot Island and you can just swim and snorkel anytime. No one's going to tell you not to go. And I found that really surprising. I think that there wasn't more regulation of it amongst the people staying there, but also I found it really great. And
Yep.
when I did the Three Capes walk, it was the same thing. You're just walking on the edge of cliffs that are 200 meters high or something. And it's like you have to take responsibility for yourself
Yep.
and for the parameters of what you should be doing because the reality is you could fall off.
Yeah. You're a part of that. Yeah, it's not just your backdrop, you're part of it.
That's right. And we shouldn't be cosseted all the time.
Thanks so much to Rebecca Olive for taking so much time to talk us through her research and her connection with the ocean. If you'd like any more information on anything you heard today, including links to Rebecca's Moving Oceans website and her conversation articles, I've got the new one up there, then get over to the website at www.thepodpodcast.net. That's www.thepodpodcast.net. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry for the delay in getting this episode out. Feel like I'm saying that a lot recently. We'll have one or two more before Christmas. My name's Mark West. I'll catch you next time on The Pod.